also more cash and voucher assistance in humanitarian contexts as opposed to being behind. Recent statistics say that in 2014, I believe the most recent number in 2015 actually is that 7% of global humanitarian assistance was provided as cash or vouchers instead of as stuff, and we kind of think that that number might be a little bit low. So that's what the Cash Learning Partnership is about changing. And we're here in the US thanks to the Office of Food for Peace. John Lamb is here representing them. Laura Meisner is also here from OFDA, thank you. And I believe we have Ruko on the webinar from Food for Peace. The Office of Food for Peace has asked the Cash Learning Partnership to work in DC with also the Technical and Operational Performance Support Project, the TOPS project, who I don't see somebody here from them today, but they're hosted by Save the Children, and that's also part of the partnership that we have here in the US. So with that, I am going to hand over to UC Berkeley, who has in their School of Public Health an Eat, Think, Design course. And they're going to explain to you how they got here, how they got on a blockchain, and what all of this means for humanitarians and development folks in the room. Great.
Perfect.
Go for it.
Great, thanks so much, Jenny. First of all, I really appreciate CALP inviting us to give this presentation. Also want to extend a thanks to USAID, Food for Peace. It's been a real pleasure for us to work with these organizations and really get a chance to experience the challenges associated with development and global aid. With that being said, I want to give a brief sense of context as to how UC Berkeley even got involved in this project. One of our alums of UC Berkeley is now working at USAID's Food for Peace, Ruko, and our instructor reached out to Ruko and said, hey, do you have a project that our students can work on? I think Ruko at the time said, hey, there's been a lot of talk about blockchain, and quite honestly, we're not entirely sure what it is, what the capabilities are, and how to employ it. Could your students take a look at this for us and think about some potentially some use cases? Yeah, I'll describe how the project has since shifted a little bit, but ultimately we had an awesome opportunity to work with USAID, John and Ruko there, and yeah. With that being said. So project framing, as I briefly mentioned, we were initially tasked with finding several specific use cases. It became very clear through the conduct of stakeholder interviews, both with individuals in global aid as well as with the technology sector, basically companies that are working on solutions using blockchain. It became very clear that there was kind of this divide between the technology side not really understanding the problems within global aid, and then the global aid side not really understanding the technology. And that's kind of how we viewed our skills being best used. So we asked the question, how might blockchain be used to improve the delivery of humanitarian aid and development? So here's the agenda. We'll just roll through some quick introductions, and then we'll go through the blockchain technology itself. We'll talk about the decision. So you'll notice that there's a sheet in front of you that looks very much like a decision modality tool, which is used by USAID. We kind of took that and adapted it so that we could use that same platform for thinking about blockchain as a potential solution. So we'll actually go through and apply that to a couple of use cases, and then we'll do an interactive case analysis, and then we'll wrap up with any questions. With that being said, I will take a moment to say that if there are any questions along the way, feel free to stop us, and we'd love to answer those questions. I'll also throw out there that this has been a learning process for us throughout, and I think even this presentation is once again a learning process. So if there are aspects that we're kind of brushing over that seem very interesting to you, please let us know either during the presentation or on the feedback form. We'd love to make this a presentation that's more useful towards audiences such as yourself. Great. So our Eat, Think, Design team, I'm realizing that I didn't explain what Eat, Think, Design is. So what it is it's a public health course offered at UC Berkeley. And the premise there is to apply design thinking to a problem that's associated with food. In this case, I guess our way in was through the USAID's Food for Peace. So while we're not directly dealing with food, I think that there were a lot of changes that have occurred recently with regards to how we think about delivering aid, instead of just in-kind aid, thinking about actually giving cash. There are inherent problems that come up, and we think that blockchain could be a potential solution to address some of those problems. So that's how our Eat, Think, Design course got involved with USAID. As far as the introductions of my team here, so Somalee unfortunately cannot be with us. She's a internal medicine physician, and she was in the course. You'll see that we're a very diverse group. I myself came to UC Berkeley Business School from the Navy. I was a submariner in the Navy prior to joining the business school, and I'm one of the MBAs on the team. And I'll let the team introduce. Sorry, just taking it over.
Okay. I'm Vasuki. I'm a PhD student in the School of Engineering. Particularly, I'm focusing on my thesis is in wireless communication. I'm an electrical engineer, and this is something that I like as a side project.
I'm Nick, also an MBA student. My background is in farming, but looking forward to working in the food system after school.
I'm Athena. I'm a public health nutrition master's student, and my background has previously been in international projects, but currently I'm more domestic, so I thought this was a way to kind of get back into it.
Great. Obviously, we were working with USAID's Food for Peace. I see John kind of grinning. This is this is your best photo, I'm sure. It was what we could find at the time. With that being said, Ruko, like I said, he had the connection to UC Berkeley, was very much, I guess, involved with one of the professors at UC Berkeley. He had gone through the Masters of Development program. And then, John, I'll kick it over to you if you want to do a quick introduction. I think most people know you here.
Yeah, just I'm a markets advisor with Food for Peace. I've been involved with the FSP program more or less since it started, the Emergency Food Security Program, and I'll leave it at that.
Perfect. Right. So goals for today, we'll give a brief introduction to blockchain. I know that there's been a lot of buzz around it, not only in global aid, but also when thinking about just the industry in general. Obviously, we're kind of in the San Francisco Bay Area. It's I feel like every other startup is somehow associated with blockchain. We wanted to give kind of a baseline introduction to blockchain just so that we're all on the same page and are speaking the same common language. And then, as mentioned, we took the decision modality tool that USAID uses and adapted it to fit thinking about blockchain as a solution. So we'll roll through what each of those items are on there, as well as apply it to a very specific case. And then finally, the presentation here. So as mentioned, we'll roll through the case from the World Food Program. They did a pilot project with blockchain technology. And then we'll go through an interactive case for the audience in the room, applying this decision tool towards a specific problem that you might have in your organization. And
Everybody here, I hope, has heard about Bitcoin, which is a cryptocurrency. And the idea of Bitcoin was put out in this paper in 2009 by this anonymous person called Satoshi Nakamoto. People are still finding out who he or she is, but we don't know. Okay, yeah, I will. But the technology behind Bitcoin is blockchain. I just want to show of hands, maybe who has a working understanding of blockchain. Great. Great. Okay. So who has heard of blockchain and is like wondering what it is about? Okay, great. Okay. So blockchain is essentially a distributed ledger. So instead of having a centralized database, which somebody has access to and can write into, blockchain is a distributed ledger. Instead of having so essentially what happens in Bitcoin is that whenever a transaction has to go through in a secured fashion, then the person who is requesting for the money and the person who's providing the money put out on the internet saying, I'm going to do this transaction. And the folks who are on Bitcoin, who are on this network, will then authenticate this transaction using something called proof of work. But that is not interesting for us right now. What is interesting is that for a distributed ledger to work, what you need is some sort of internet connection and some connectivity so that everybody can tell what transactions that they want to happen to an entity that can do these authentication. And because it's going to be a decentralized way, there's not going to be tampering that any attack can do. So, for example, if you are using Visa, even though Visa is supposed to be very secure, there is a potential that somebody who has access to the database of Visa can go and change some of the transactions and make bogus things. But in blockchain, because everything is distributed ledger, and the way it works is that all of the transactions that have happened from day one till day to day, all of those are stored in ledger and everybody has a copy of it. And so that if anybody goes and tries to change anything, they just can't, because there's no way you can tweak the past. Once it has happened, it stays like that forever. And another thing that is interesting about blockchain is that all the nodes have visibility into the ledger. So no one person owns it. Let's say that me, Matthew, Nick, and Athena are on a network, and we can see that the transactions, what transactions are happening and between whom. And only the people on the network can see. If you want it to be, and nobody else can see it. But there is visibility. So if there is some way there is a leaky pipeline that is happening, that Nick for some reason is giving money away to Athena but he doesn't want us to know about it, that just cannot be possible. Everybody gets to know. There's a question.
I have one quick question. I can wait to the end if it makes more sense.
Uh-huh.
So if my understanding is that if everybody has the data on their device of like what's on my, the trades that happen in this network, if it's a private network, public, I have no idea how that works. So how do you deal with data storage if everybody has every like part of, especially as it gets larger? I mean, processing power eventually Intel will come up with that, but like, data I don't understand.
Yeah, that's a great question, in fact. So whatever I've described so far was the ideal vision of blockchain, that this is how Bitcoin should operate and this is how blockchain should be. But turns out that is not how it is being implemented right now. So it's somewhere between the ideal of decentralized, everybody has all the data, to a bank has all all records of your transactions. So it's somewhere between that. So right now, the way it happens is that there are services that store the blockchain information and the ledger for you. And what you use is a wallet program. So your computer, you can install an app and you can say, I want to do this transaction. And this wallet program will then send that information out to the server of whichever service you are using. And they store everything for you.
So that's no different than a centralized network. If you're still like putting it off on one central server.
Yeah.
So,
Go on.
so it's similar but different. The difference is that, by the way, my name is Michael Novak. I'm definitely independent. Been working with blockchain for about the last 2 years as a how it can be used for great projects like this, not as a cryptocurrency expert. So I don't know everything, even though I may sound like it at times, I don't. But to your point, the idea is with blockchain is it's distributed, so you get to participate. Number two, every single transaction, like she mentioned, is kept in a single file. However, as she mentioned, you can download a wallet application that talks to a node, and the nodes is what they call that computer out there in the cloud somewhere that holds the whole copy of every single transaction that Bitcoin has ever participated in since the beginning of time, 2008. So it's not client server directly, but it's more distributed because each one of these nodes has an exact copy of the record. So if I put a single transaction on, it gets distributed to everybody in this room based on internet speed and connectivity. Everybody gets a copy, so it's decentralized. But if I just want to do a transaction, I don't have to have that whole thing on my mobile device. I can just say, Mr. Wallet, please go do this transaction. It'll say fine, and it connects to that node, and then it gets spread out amongst everybody who participates. Does that help? Or
I think the center diagram
Exactly.
kind of helps a little bit.
yeah, actually, it's the right-hand side is where.
Well, that's where we're at the ideal phase, but
Well, yeah.
okay.
Since we're talking about blockchain,
Mhm.
it doesn't have to be a financial transaction. It could be a copy of my will. It could be a smart contract. It doesn't have to be cryptocurrency. So anything that can be reduced to a file, a picture, a text file, a movie, what have you, is distributed to everybody who's on the system. And then whoever picks it up next, like I die, my attorney picks it up, that gets locked in, subsequently forming the chain for those people who are on the system. If you're not on the system, there's no problem.
Any other questions now that you're on the topic of blockchain and how it works? Okay, so this is just a visualization of how the networks are operating. So you can think of this as your bank, and that the bank has all this information about your credit card transactions. This is a completely decentralized transaction, not completely, but somewhat decentralized. And in distributed ledgers, you see that we have the same thing replicated two ways, and you might be wondering what these are. We just wanted to show that blockchain could be both private as well as public, in the sense that anybody who is a part of blockchain or that particular blockchain can have visibility, or you can also make it semi-private. You can say that only certain people can have visibility into this network, and that's what we kind of wanted to capture with these node diagrams.
Excuse me, when you say anybody, do you have to qualify, fill out an application? You don't. Anybody, really, literally anybody can participate.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why use blockchain? So what are some of the advantages of using blockchain? First of all, the whole reason why this was introduced was to have a decentralized, let's get rid of a bank kind of authority. And so it eliminates the need for a central authority. And also in and also third-party actors in terms of I don't need to go to a bank to open an account, or I don't need to go to a credit union to open an account. So you can think of other kinds of third-party actors as well. So it eliminates the need for all of those. And the ledger itself is completely secure. There is no, it's tamper-proof. You cannot go and change it. It's completely transparent. And anybody can have, whoever has the privileges can have access to all the transactions, depending on whether it's private or public. And it is auditable. So if you want to track what has happened with a particular, say, cryptocurrency or a particular asset, where it originated and how it has flown in time, you can completely track it. So it is auditable. And it also improves other on existing transactions, like reduced transaction times. If you want to send money to someone, say in Kazakhstan, then you would go to Western Union Money Transfer and say, go please transfer. That takes a lot of time. But if the person in Kazakhstan, say, is using similar Bitcoin or blockchain as you are, then you can transfer that money pretty instantaneously. Not instantaneously, but pretty instantaneously. And the main thing about blockchain is that the accountability and the trackability of it. So it reduces risk of fraud and leaky pipeline. And just like the person back there asked, why use blockchain when you can do this with a simple database? It's because of the reason that it is immutable. So once it has been written, once it's out there, there's no way you can go and change anything. So it's extremely secure. And with that, oh yeah, just wanted to put this out there.
Yeah, I think what we're trying to highlight here is that sort of where we are in blockchain, and we're having proofs of concept. We have people doing pilot projects, but really in the longer term, we see a lot more applications and a lot more opportunities for blockchain to be used. So now that we've sort of had an intro to the technology and have seen how it's applied for financial transactions, we also started to mention that there are a lot of other use cases for blockchain. So for example, some exciting pilots have started in the last year. In China, there have been a lot of food safety concerns. And so it becomes really important to know the origin of a food product if it's been contaminated, so that that problem can be shut down. So Walmart and IBM have partnered to really understand the pork supply chain in China, so that you can monitor things such as what temperature the meat was stored at, where it's coming from, and really understand if there's a problem. In another case, the shipping industry, for example, there are tons of moving pieces. So Maersk and IBM have also started a project that will sort of simplify and unify the contracts that are being exchanged in order to make a delivery. They did a study, Maersk, a few years ago, where one refrigerated shipment from East Africa to Europe would change hands something like 30 times, and there'd be 300 pieces of paper. So this is a huge opportunity to streamline that process, have it all recorded, all on the blockchain. And there's also the opportunity, of course, as we discovered in humanitarian aid. An organization called Bank is interested in giving people an economic identity. So if you're a refugee or someone who's very poor or without access to sort of traditional financial institutions, Bank is understanding that blockchain can be a way to give people an economic identity and be involved.
So I have not familiar with bonk. How do you spell that?
BANQU.
Thank you.
So as we were conducting our research here and trying to identify opportunities, we just wanted to point out that we started with humanitarian sector stakeholders. So we talked to our USAID advisors, NGO innovation officers, and humanitarian aid workers. But again, we want to emphasize that what's important is to connect the two groups. We need to connect those humanitarian sector stakeholders with technical sector stakeholders. So we also found it very helpful to talk with blockchain experts, a blockchain VC, the innovation officers of big tech companies. So moving forward, we really want to emphasize that the connection between these two groups is going to be important in humanitarian aid applications.
Perfect. Thanks, Nick. So when we think about some of the overall opportunities and challenges, there's numerous things that need to be considered here. I realize that this is somewhat a text-heavy slide, so I just kind of wanted to focus on things that are probably the most interesting. First of all are the modalities, thinking about the fact that this technology allows you to efficiently transfer electronic assets. However, as Nick mentioned, there are several other assets that we would want to track. The interesting point there is that you would need some way to convert that physical asset, whether it's, let's say, tracking pork or pharmaceuticals or something like that. You'd need some way to make that into a unique asset that then can be correlated with a unique electronic asset. So there's a couple companies that are working in this space to create tags for specific items that can then convert that item to an electronic, unique electronic asset. I'd also like to focus on scaling. One thing that's particularly important within global aid is creating a platform that's public in nature, and that way numerous organizations can tag onto that platform. The examples that Nick gave with regards to Maersk or Walmart, we think of those as being private and being contained within an organization. However, what we've noticed is that in global aid, rarely is the NGO or organization working on their own. And therefore, it's absolutely important that they think about the scaling aspect and how easy it is for other organizations to tag in and adopt that platform. Along with that, that kind of dovetails right into regulations. So there is regulation uncertainty. Regulations can allow for platforms to exist that are public platforms that allow for others to join in. But also, when we think about where blockchain is right now as a technology, as you've kind of seen, blockchain is it's kind of like the Wild West, I guess is the best way to put it. There's all sorts of organizations trying to think of new ways to use blockchain. And while regulation may come with the development of this technology, at the end of the day, I like to think about blockchain. This came from an article, but blockchain is kind of like the internet, where the internet was 20 years ago, in the sense that because there is a lack of regulation, it allows for new inventive modes or innovative modes of applying blockchain that would not otherwise occur if blockchain as a technology was heavily regulated right off the bat.
Great. So through our conversations, it became clear that there's a trajectory, a sequence of things that happens as a potential application is conceived and trialed and then implemented more broadly. But really, before these proofs of concepts are established and before they're applied more broadly, the most important and essential first step in the humanitarian aid sector is that they're equipped, humanitarian aid workers are equipped to assess the appropriateness of blockchain technology. We really want to emphasize that it's that on-the-ground experience, it's understanding who the beneficiaries are, how they'll be affected, what the existing systems are, all these variables that only those decision makers in that sector can understand before things are taken more broadly. And with that, we came up with some questions, which you have in front of you, which begins to sort of distill what that decision-making process looks like. So in considering the objective that is to be accomplished, the feasibility of using the technology, and also cost considerations. And so now we're going to walk through a specific case using this framework.
Yeah, I'll go back just one slide just to kind of highlight one point on here. So all of the follow-on items here that think about it in terms of adoption or actually creating a proof of concept are all reliant on that first step. I think Nick kind of mentioned that, but I'll go one step further and state that if blockchain is not an appropriate solution, then it doesn't make sense to engage in any of these other activities. It doesn't make sense to try to recruit enthusiastic adopters. It doesn't make sense to try to create a proof of concept if blockchain is just not the right technology for what you're trying to achieve. So that's ultimately what the decision tool is trying to assess, is given the challenges that you're facing in your organization, could blockchain be a solution for that?
I do want to give a little bit more context to the decision tool because I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with the market modality tool that USAID Food for Peace uses. I know John can probably give a way better description of this, but that decision tool is a 4-step process instead of a 3-step process. And we ended up kind of combining appropriateness and objective into one category. But that modality tool kind of looks at if cash-based transfers or if vouchers or things like that are an appropriate modality for the specific market, because we recognize that maybe in-kind is the best solution for that specific place, and kind of what Matthew was saying, understanding that maybe this isn't always the right way to go. So now we're going to go through this decision modality tool and talk about kind of, I would say, the most current and most famous proof of concept. That how many people are familiar with the World Food Programme's proof of concept and upcoming pilot? Oh, good. Okay, so it is pretty new for everybody. So we spoke with Alexander Alden and Houman Haddad, who were kind of the leads on this project. Alex Alden is an innovation consultant with UN Food for Peace's Innovation Accelerator, and Houman is he's a cash-based transfer advisor for North Africa and the Middle East. He was kind of spearheading this project, and they did an innovation sprint, which is kind of similar to our human-centered design thinking. So we really liked how well that aligned with our project. And so this proof of concept started in Pakistan in January of this year. And 100 recipients received 3,000 rupees and the equivalent amount in food as well. And they were just trying to make sure that blockchain was viable for this situation before they expanded into a pilot. And so we're mainly going to talk about this proof of concept, but currently starting May 1st, this expanded into a pilot in Jordan. Right. So just to kind of, I think when we started this, I had no idea what a blockchain transfer looked like on an individual's end. I can kind of conceptualize it in the space of decentralization, but what does it look like for the beneficiary? What does it look like for the recipient? So we just kind of wanted to map that out. And a really important thing to note is that this is similar to mobile money transfers, and it's similar to how the user would interface with something like M-Pesa or something that they already are familiar with, so there isn't that steep learning curve. So a vendor has an app for recording transactions, and you can kind of see that app it's smartphone based. So you can see that right now they're using an iPad. And this is actually Houman. So once that vendor has the app, the vendor puts in the details of the transaction. And so that includes like the goods or the amount of money that's predetermined. And the beneficiary would then receive a one-time password, so that's the OTP, on their cell phone, which the SIM and everything like that are already entered into the system. So that one-time password is then provided to the vendor to complete the transaction. And then the beneficiary receives the cash in the purchase. And then afterwards, the ledger is, the reports are generated so you can compare to make sure that there wasn't any fraud, that everything lines up appropriately. And I just also want to highlight that this one-time password now has moved towards iris scans in Jordan. So it eliminates the need. So that is what proves that it's the individual beneficiary. Are there any questions about this transaction before I move into the decision tool? Yeah.
It's clear that I don't know a thing about this.
No.
But that's okay. So when you say everybody, or we look and make sure that it's transparent and we make sure it's not corrupted, who are we?
That's a great question. So in this case, it's the World Food Program. So they're making sure that their aid is matching up with the beneficiary who's supposed to receive it.
So every time there's a partnership, for lack of a better word, like this, people are designated to be those who watch over this system so that we're sure everything's going okay. And if they recognize something's not so good, they have the power to do something about it.
Right. I think maybe I'm not fully understanding.
I think that sounds aligned. The way they are envisioning this is that maybe every week or every month the vendor will be paid for the goods that they have distributed. So for every vendor, then let's say the NGO or World Food Program will generate a report saying these are the transactions that happened, and then they can match it up with on the beneficiary side. The beneficiary use these vendors so they can match that, and because this is blockchain, this matching will automatically be true. So they have to just generate a report for each vendor and go and pay them whatever. Yes.
I mean, this may be getting ahead of the next topic. You had said this is, it's kind of similar to how M-Pesa would work. Not that M-Pesa is in Pakistan, but if we were in Kenya, where there's M-Pesa. Now, it does seem similar, but I can see one disadvantage is that with M-Pesa or an M-Pesa-like system, the vendor doesn't have to have a smartphone. The vendor can have a cheap phone that, much more accessible in many contexts than a smartphone is. So I can see one disadvantage. What would be the advantage of this over just an M-Pesa-like system if that were available?
Right. So I don't think a smartphone is necessary. So all of this has to do is you can send in the transaction details via an SMS and say that I am providing 1 kg of rice to this person with this ID number, and that should go through. So you don't need a smartphone.
So the vendor doesn't have to have the app. Someone else needs to have the app that just gets the SMS from the vendor.
It was that, so the smartphone technology is just how this specific proof of concept was set up, but there are definitely other ways to do it. So for example, like a scorecard, how those aren't like smart cards, those are like the little point of sale machines. Like different technologies can be used. It does just have to be a technology. So it can't just be like a simple.
How can you?
The other thing I was going to add to that is with blockchain, and especially with Ethereum, which is the company that, if you will, builds the tools that can create a blockchain, they have this capability to write business rules. And this is what helps accelerate these transactions. It's not me sending you $1. Well, he still has to look at it and say, yeah, that's okay, we're going to approve it. With blockchain, these business rules are coded, but they're built into the blockchain. So if I say I want to send you $1 or $1 million a kilogram of rice, it'll look at that business rule and say, yes, it meets these qualifications, and it gets done in hours as opposed to weeks, days, years, approved. So when they look at the report, they can't change any transactions. Oh yeah, yesterday or 10 minutes ago or an hour ago, this happened. So then the other question is, well, what if they made a mistake? Well, because all the records are written and they're immutable, they cannot be changed. That's okay. We can still put in a brand new transaction that says, you know what, I sent you a kilogram, it was supposed to be 100. So here's a 90 kilogram new transaction to make you whole. But it's still all in the transaction log, the blockchain. And again, that's why you need that whole log. If I only give you a month's view a year ago, something may have happened, I wouldn't know about it. So I need that whole log. But once I have it, I validate everything up until today, and I'm good. So that way, anything that happens is still reconcilable. So in your case with M-Pesa, why is it better, stronger, faster? It's faster. Also, the blockchain does use encryption. So it's not as insecure as just an SMS saying, I sent John 1 kilogram of rice. It's encoded and encrypted. So hopefully that helps.
So, could you go back to the use case?
Yeah.
Just to clarify, so the vendor is like a grocer.
Sorry, the vendor is like
a grocer?
A
Could be
grocer.
grocer, right? The vendor's the grocer.
Yeah.
The beneficiary had the app on his or her phone, right?
The beneficiary doesn't have the
Ah,
app. The
okay.
beneficiary just got like a text message that had the one-time password.
Okay, it's a one-time password, and then I see. So it's just really on the grocer side. They take that password, they load it into their system.
Right.
They charge against that.
Right. So this is just showing that the app that the vendor has, and then the beneficiaries, like little Nokia doesn't have to be a smartphone.
Right. I know that we have a couple questions in the back over there. I just wanted to clarify a couple things. So when we think about what this blockchain looks like for the end user, the beneficiary, quite honestly, it's exactly like what we described. It is, the beneficiary does not know that blockchain is behind the technology. It could very well, it looks to them like it's the same as M-Pesa, where they are receiving a PIN, they are giving that to the vendor, and then the payment is occurring. Why use blockchain? Blockchain is the immutable record. In the case of M-Pesa, that information is being stored on in one database somewhere, and that could be potentially changed if the organization overseeing M-Pesa were to want to change it. Whereas in this case, blockchain, because the platform that it's built on, Ethereum, is being distributed, it can be audited at any time later by anybody that, let's say, the organization grants access to. And right.
Yes.
So when you say it can be audited, like how do you pull up an audit report? I mean, I just think about USAID and accounting regulations, and everything kind of needs to be detailed, tracked in a very detailed manner. How do you create an audit report and just reports in general? If it's on a distributed network, can you pull up a report from one of the nodes that has everything, or?
So every node will have everything. If you're using the Ethereum network, for example, then let's say they create something with 10 nodes. Each node will have the entire copy. Unless you move to a very distributed one, for example, what was that?
But the answer for reporting, there's no change. You're still just asking that.
There's this thing called the blockchain explorers, which are basically like a browser, and you can go look at any of the transactions, and then somebody can write a reporting script to say, hey, go pull all these transactions between whoever the buyer and the seller is, and so forth. Although interesting here, you don't really have, like in Bitcoin, a public key. You're not using the front end of it, right? The vendor has a public key.
Yeah.
But there's no way. How do you identify who the buyer is?
That is what you use, some identifying information about the buyer. Let's say the phone number or some unique ID that this person will have to input. And the cryptographic signature part of Bitcoin, you can think of the one-time password as that.
So you tied the one-time password to, there's a database somewhere which has like
Which is connected to mostly biometrics. So fingerprints and
it's implicit, it's tied into that.
Right. Yeah. So I'm sure, as you guys can tell, that like this often goes hand in hand with biometrics, which is kind of a great coincidence for this realm.
this, right? Because the infrastructure is not there. Show me your government ID. What are you talking about? I live in that village. I've been here my life. Anyway, I don't have any ID.
Did you have a question back there? The same question. Okay, great. So we kind of talked about a lot of what I'm about to go through in kind of a roundabout way, but I do just kind of want to narrow in. So for looking at the decision tool, the objective section is kind of built to be almost like a yes or no checklist, because if you're not interested in these things on the checklist, then blockchain is not a solution that your program should be pursuing. So WFP they were doing a design thinking approach and tried to look at the problem set instead of using blockchain as a solution versus kind of more solutioneering. So they really noticed that they wanted a way to mitigate risk and to mitigate fraud. The current system is like paying upfront amounts monthly, so there's a lot of risk involved in that. There's lengthy contracts to ensure that like different startups actually deliver the aid and kind of working with that kind of crazy distributed network. And there's also a strong desire to increase beneficiary privacy. And so instead of having to deal with like shuffling paperwork and identification, to already have all of those biometrics uploaded onto a centralized system. So kind of similar to how the scorecard currently is, of how like you can constantly update on their private system. So they were trying to integrate that in a more seamless way. Also, they were interested in keeping their conditionality aspects. So this specific population, they'd already done an instant cash program with the year before, but like the funds had run out. So they were comfortable with the conditionality of doing nutrition trainings before receiving this. So there is a way to like have that kind of CCT mentality in blockchain, but also have like no conditionality if that's preferred. Also, there's a drive to increase the amount of money that goes to beneficiaries. Obviously, we all want to make sure that beneficiaries get the most end result. So by cutting out all these intermediaries and decreasing the admin fees, decreasing the transfer fees, like cutting out the different bankers, then you can get more money to the beneficiary. And that really was the drive behind this and why blockchain was seen as such a viable solution. So feasibility is something that we just talked about a lot in terms of infrastructure. And we talked about the technical requirements. So in this case, it was smartphone enabled with the vendor. But there were actually some implementation issues with the individual beneficiaries having those registered SIM cards. It needs to be the one individual who's related to the biometric system. So there were a few issues of beneficiaries having phones that didn't have SIMs in them at all, or having the correct SIM, switching around SIMs between family members, or connectivity issues on the server. So out of the 198 went through, but there were those 2 that had an issue. So we also talked about how there needs to be minimal disruption to the beneficiaries so that it's similar to existing processes, so that it doesn't, like we talked a lot about in the domestic end of, I know for like SNAP and EBT, we want to make sure as many people are using it as possible, and making any tweak drives people away. So how can we not make this confusing on the user end to drive people away from what's supposed to be getting them money? Additionally, so we've been kind of throwing out private, semi-private, public, and we've also been throwing out the word Ethereum. So this was based off of Ethereum, and they partnered with Parity and Datarella. I'm not sure if I'm exactly saying that right. So WFP is based in Munich, so Datarella is also in Munich, I believe. So Parity is kind of that wallet technology program that Vasuki was explaining before. And so talking about the compatibility with the organization, Hahn mentioned that they didn't really have to bridge that step of convincing everyone in the UN that this is a great solution, because it was just part of the innovation accelerator. So currently they're kind of dealing with those issues and trying to get more people on board and increasing education. But since penetration was low, that wasn't an issue for this step, but it probably will be in the future. So the cost was one of the main drivers in making sure that this
program was feasible for the World Food Program. And I'm going to look at my note to give you guys the exact statistic. But so currently overhead costs are about 3.5%, and Hahn estimated that this could bring down overhead costs to less than 1%. So that's representing a huge increase in the amount of funds that can go straight to the beneficiary. And so estimates $20 million a year in savings based on the future $2 billion cash-based transfer goal. So as Jenny mentioned at the beginning, there's a current push to try to get as many cash-based transfers and kind of flip the switch on what's previously been in-kind donations. And I know in just 1 year, the World Food Program alone increased their monetary amounts by $5 billion in just a year from 2015 to 2016. And so the drivers of costs that are being eliminated are these per transaction costs that normally are paid in banking fees. And this type of ledger would have some cost involved, and data storage that we mentioned before is a huge aspect of cost. And then also the operator cost, who is that person auditing the system? What does that cost? How many people need to do that? And that's kind of up in the air right now, especially as this pilot grows. And currently, the cost sharing is purely taken on by WFP, but Hahn really kind of was taking a broader picture and talked a lot about on our call, hopefully opening this up to every NGO or every stakeholder in this position, so that this was a really neutral platform that allowed for collaboration, which could cut costs for all actors in the program. So I talked about the implementation concerns of the actual infrastructure, but so we got to the end of this decision tool, and we realized that there was still some unanswered questions, even if you got done with feasibility, if you took cost into account. So we just wanted to step back and look at, hey, so we did this checklist, but we still need to think about a few things that aren't really checklistable. And a lot of that was just in scalability and continual implementation. So one of the things that we've already talked about is making sure that users are engaged and that you have buy-in from everyone in your organization or everyone on the ground. And Hahn mentioned that they had a manual that they were very prepared to give out and give people the elevator pitch on, but they wanted to make sure that this process was so streamlined and so non-disruptive that it wouldn't even be necessary. But they do have that grassroots education if necessary. And he also really wanted to emphasize, and we also want to emphasize, the user-centered design aspect. And that's coming from our human-centered design focus, but also because we know that the beneficiaries are really who we're trying to help. And so making sure that this interface and this program is working for them is really where this should all stem from. And I think that's kind of how they noticed the issues with the SIM card. And so it's okay, this proof of concept works technically, but it didn't work for those two people. So how can we make this better? Oh, iris scan technology is something that we have access to, is growing. So in the pilot, that's why the iris scan was used as the one-time password instead of the SIM card, or instead of the SMS. Does anyone have any questions about this use case before we move on to working out another use case?
Yeah, so once they found the vendors, was there monitoring of the vendors to make sure that the quality of goods that was delivered was still the same as when they first identified the vendors?
I don't think we asked them that question, but because it was such a small proof of concept, so you could see that Hahn was sitting with the vendors. So I think he could tell.
That may not be scalable.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think that one's scalable. But that's a good question.
I know it's a little bit outside of the whole blockchain
Well, to that point though, if you did have post-origin monitoring data, would that become part of the chain? If you did, say, have a sampling where people are actually going out and collecting data to see, whether people receive what they were supposed to receive.
Yeah, that definitely could be a part of the data collection. So one of
transaction.
it's not really quality, but definitely one of the benefits is on that ledger, you can see exactly what was distributed instead of just a more general like transaction happened. It's like exact a list. So I don't think that really says like quality of what was delivered, but
So I was saying, you can make that an attribute. So, you know, the transaction on the log is not something somebody develops. Just like normal databases, you can define what columns you want to capture, name, price, date. You could have an attribute that says quality of transaction. And when that transaction occurs, hey, I'm paying you for this kilogram of rice. Were you happy with this transaction? Yes, no, whatever parameter you want to use. And you could capture that as part of that transaction. So yes, you could do that.
And what if their report card's full of Fs? What happens?
sorry, could you repeat that?
Their report card is full of Fs and the quality's bad and they didn't deliver and, right. So what happens?
What happens?
Sorry.
I mean, that's more of a management question, right? If I look at you and say, you know what, everybody here used you as a vendor and they thought you were horrible,
Right.
then the management, the organization, the NGO, whoever was controlling it could say, oh yeah, we ran a report and saw Fred got 12 unhappy faces. They could decide, you know what, we're going to use a different vendor. That would be more of a business decision, not a technical decision.
Okay. And maybe that's pointing to that this isn't the right modality for the market and the location.
Okay.
So that might be something to consider the way front end of the original decision modality tool.
I have a couple of questions. One is just that this means that it's limited to vendors that the WFP lets them sort of conduct those transactions. So it's sort of limiting the choices, but frankly, there'd be less choices in this case. But also, if we're thinking about scaling it up, having these sort of vendor-based connections can be a concern, and that it can also be a concern in terms of having limited limiting the choice of the consumer, which can be a problem in the development community itself. Do we want to be the big brother or not? So I think that's one part of it, and the other is the transactions that are happening between the vendor and the WFP. Are they happening on the blockchain or outside of it? The monetary transactions.
So I want to answer the first part of your question, which is that beneficiaries are being constricted about which vendors they can use. So that is actually one of the aspects in the modality tool itself. If you look at so in the cost, if you look at point 2, which says, are there advantages with network effects? That is exactly the point, that if you grow the network, is it actually going to make things better? So let's say if you get more and more vendors into your network, then it actually drives, it makes it gets beneficiaries more choices. And also, if you have more and more beneficiaries who want to use this, then vendors would also feel the need to get onto this platform because they also want to have the consumer. So that is actually a thing that is happening because of using blockchain technology. What's your second question?
That the transaction between WFP and the vendors, is it happening on the blockchain or outside of it? That's a monetary transaction happening, right?
Yes.
So are they sending money through blockchain or are they doing it outside?
So I think they finally gave cash or some form of money to these vendors, but all the transactions are definitely recorded on blockchain. So
it's not cryptocurrency though. It's not currency. Yeah.
Just a little bit caveat. I think there's a lot of discussion, and I think we are mixing the real value of blockchain with other issues. So definitely, it's not a panacea to all the problems. There has to be a well-established system already existing before using blockchain. So if you have got issues with food distribution, if you have got issues with sending money somewhere, those issues would always exist there. So you really need to apply blockchain in a place where there is already an established system existing. Either you need to develop a system, or you need to have a developed system already existing and functioning. So it's not different than software development. So you need to take care of your software development in first place and then move to the blockchain. That has to be there. So for example, there is a company, an association called R3. I don't know if people have heard about it. So what it does is, so worldwide they got about like 50 banks. So each bank is having their own functional system. They have their functional system working, a centralized functioning system. These 50 banks got together and saying, okay, we do have our functioning system, but we need to reduce our cost now. We need to cut down the cost. What can we do? We can share some of the transactions that we are actually using for the purpose of reconciliation over the blockchain. So from now onward, like on a monthly basis, we not need to send people out there to negotiate with you, check across records, everything, because we are sharing, those 50 banks are sharing records among each other, and that's why they can save costs. So it does not necessarily have to be applied here. So in the case of M-Pesa, there is an already existing system, but if you want to give this further or enhance the security of M-Pesa system, you can pass some of the transactions to the blockchain. That's how it works. It's not different. So the user interface does not have to be limited to this case. For example, in this case, the end user or the beneficiary is not having any kind of interaction with the system. But in another case, for example, we are working with the Ukraine. There's a state auctioning system. So the end beneficiary is actually having access to the blockchain because the state actually puts a property, an asset for auctioning and bidding, and end users can actually bid for it. So each transaction is actually going on the blockchain. So the case is not actually limited to this. You already need to have a system in place, and only then you can use the blockchain.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make some good points that you can extend current systems, but I would disagree in that you have to have a current system. I mean, what the blockchain provides, and I think what they're describing is a global infrastructure, a database either through Ethereum now or Bitcoin or the others that you can ride these transactions on, even if you don't have a current system.
But you need to develop it then.
But there's what Bitcoin has provided is a infrastructure that now NGOs, private organizations are trying to figure out, can I ride my transactions on that new infrastructure? And so you don't need to have something in place. Those R3, these other companies are trying to say, okay, how does my system interact with that?
Sure, but Ethereum is actually giving you an access to put information to that bucket, which makes no sense. Like if you are putting all that together in a bucket, that gives no sense. You need to develop your application for the end user to make sense of that data, to generate reports and everything else. That is not given through Ethereum. Ethereum is your gateway to the blockchain and nothing else.
Good philosophical discussion.
Yeah.
I think it is new. I don't think you need anything before. That's what I think that's the exciting
You need
thing
to
about
develop everything like from scratch.
Sure, there's development.
Back to the case study. So the case study was where the transfer, was it transferred money to the beneficiary or the beneficiary accounts, or was it for certain food items that they could then get from the vendor?
Yeah, but they also received certain goods at
So it
the
was
same
both.
time. So it was both, yeah.
Okay, all right.
In your research, did you learn anything about how it was introduced to different stakeholders? You talked a little bit about how the participants didn't, or the beneficiaries didn't really see this, but can you talk about the vendors, and you haven't mentioned government yet, or how are those other stakeholders in this story? Or did that even come up?
So it didn't come up in conversation. I think it was one of the questions that we asked, how did you convince stakeholders? Because obviously, when you think about banks that are currently receiving that money and then distributing it to the individuals, they have a vested interest in keeping things the way that they are.
Right.
And then I would even say within UN's World Food Program, there's stakeholders who want to keep it the way that it is. I think they were very specific, and this was on that one slide that had kind of the different steps. They were very intentional about choosing a specific country and specific population and team that was receptive to adopting a new technology. Once again, I think part of it was, this is obviously not, it was a proof of concept. It's not being used currently as the solution in the area. So I think maybe stakeholders were a little bit more amenable to the idea of at least trialing it. But I think that that's one of the challenges that will continue to be faced.
Yeah, and I want to add to that. So there's another new pilot that is coming up called Global Aid Coin, which is the technology is very similar to the pilot by World Food Program, but they don't yet have a pilot program running. So it would be great to know from them about how did they go about financing, because they haven't yet figured out which area they're going to do. So that's yeah.
I can also speak a little bit more to, like you mentioned, the banks are probably not going to be happy about, like, hey, you guys are no longer effective, we don't want you. But Hahn really was kind of framing it as, like, you can be a positive force in this, like, disruption of your own industry, and you can kind of join us in this and, like, work to restructure and kind of, like, go with it instead of against it, and, like, eventually become ineffective.
So did all the beneficiaries receive an identity on the network? And if, I mean, I assume they did if they're able to, like, go to a vendor and get food, but would future blockchain applications be able to leverage that identity? So, like, meaning, like, everything's the interoperability aspect and reuse and standards as we kind of move forward. And
I think that's definitely possible, but it should be a consideration for people who are building the system. I don't think there's any restriction about not leveraging an existing identity.
And is there anyone, like, kind of, I mean, maybe this is what you guys are doing right now, but bringing people together to build a consortium of whether it's aid folks or whatnot, so we could build standards together, so we're all kind of building on the same platform and can reuse, each other's, like, work.
Yeah, so that's an excellent point, and that was, I think, the most salient aspect in having these conversations with both the technology side as well as various stakeholders within global and development aid, was that aspect that there really is no consortium that is the overarching entity. Locally, there's DC Blockchain. I don't know if Daryl made it today. So locally, there's DC Blockchain. There's actually a conference happening in New York starting tomorrow, so I know that a lot of folks that would have been here are headed up that way. Yeah, I think that there's significant opportunity there. As far as who should lead that effort, I think that there's a lot of private companies that are trying to create venues where that conversation can occur. This obviously has trade-offs in terms of they probably have a vested interest in creating that community, but by the same token, I think we lose some of the idea of creating a public platform by having a private company create that.
So also from a technical perspective, they're using Ethereum as their tool. We talked about it's a tool. It's not, here's Ethereum, everything works, don't worry about it, just push a button. Someone still has to write the code. From a beneficiary perspective, blockchain is dumb. It doesn't know you, and it doesn't maintain any information about you specifically, like were you a good actor or a bad actor 5 minutes ago or 5 days ago. So you don't need to, like a traditional database, you wouldn't look you up and say, yeah, he's in here, he's good, let him do this. The blockchain doesn't care. It's just recording on this date and time, this event happened, period. So from the open standards perspective, there might be from, the WPF might have some open standards for the business side of how they want to do business with vendors and beneficiaries. From the technical side, there's no need for a standard to remember who you are. Does that make sense?
And also, like, on the point of this public and private blockchain, there is no 100% security in any case. It enhances the security, but if anybody has got access to the 50+1 node, you can still manipulate
for Bitcoin. Yeah, I was going to talk about pseudo-anonymity.
And also, one point that was talked about, it does not encode, it hashes everything on the chain. And there's a difference between encoding and hashing. So
I was going to stay away from that because I figured in this group.
There's also data sharing happening at the identity management level among the UN. I think they're trying to establish a sort of a common network of identity management so that they can have a more global blockchain partnership or have these transactions more globally and identify individuals on different in different countries who could otherwise be duplicated, but with data sharing through blockchain, they can sort of minimize that, if not eliminate.
Yeah, I mean, if the food programs had a permission blockchain, you could establish your own standard for identity, and then hopefully that could be the standard that other sister programs would use. You can also connect blockchains. So, I mean, you're building like an ecosystem that you want to, you build a foundation and other people can join it and you can sort of adjust. It's a very evolutionary sort of project.
However, just to your point about the blockchains, they're still different. I mean, Ethereum can't talk to Bitcoin as far as I know directly.
They can if there's
You
a
can
side
build an
chain.
API.
But yeah, exactly. So
there's a side chain established in between them.
yeah,
They can.
side chains.
But consensus is actually at the heart of this, which is a simple thing, when we say it, there's really a big thing in that. If we want that to happen in practice, it doesn't happen in manual systems,
Right.
How long does it take to get people in one room, specifically for donors?
Plus, it has advantages over
a lot of
Bitcoin as well. So Ethereum.
That's
is
it.
good.
Yeah, one last question.
Yeah, I have two questions. One is I'm a little confused as to what the purpose of the meeting is. So is the purpose of this meeting to be apostolic and have people go forth and plant apple trees, we'll call them blockchain trees? So if that's one potential purpose, I'm not telling you your business. The second is just an observation. Having done a fair amount of work for the US government and other governments, usually there's somebody in contracts who says, and here's the standard. So when we're doing the following things, here is the standard. So if USAID or DOD or DOE or Lawrence Berkeley Lab says, and this is the standard for doing the following. We want it in JavaScript. We want it blah, 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 Ethereum. I mean, the people who aren't familiar with the technology will be snowed and all the acronyms. But somebody comes up with the standard. Otherwise, there's a whole proliferation and handshaking doesn't work. R3 is all about handshaking, but they're concerned about handshaking $1 trillion worth of foreign exchange transactions every couple of minutes. That's a big deal. That's why they got to get together. USAID, if it's even around in 3 years, has a vested interest in making sure, I would believe, whoever's here from AID would have an interest in making sure that future blockchain systems handshake, because everything's related to everything. So supply chain is going to be related to purchasing. And in everything that's going on in India right now, we're switching money, and biometrics is going to affect everybody. So like Wayne Gretzky said, why he's so great, he goes to where the puck's going to be, not where it is. So you got to be shooting where it's going to be. So sorry for the question and the point. So AID, whoever's here from AID, who could speak for AID or chooses not to, has a vested interest in working with contracts or somebody to say, and this is how we do things in the blockchain world, so the different systems will be able to handshake. So I'm sorry for the big speech, but if it's to be apostolic, the people who don't know this stuff are being snowed, sorry, and the people who do know this stuff can actually go up and say, here's 3 use cases right now, boom, 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 that's happening, and a company coming to a theater near you, but you don't even know it because it's going to show up in a week or two. It's moving that fast. Sorry.
So, John, I don't know if you have any comment there. I'd be more than happy to just kind of say, to your second point, absolutely. I think that's why we're having this meeting, and ultimately the goal of this meeting was to provide that basic level of understanding of this is what blockchain, why it's being considered for aid, and these are the considerations that you need to make to determine whether it is a good application for what you're trying to solve. I think the next step from there is really getting involved and being a voice to set those standards. I think, I don't want to go into the political realm, but I think when you just think, if you're not an active participant, you're not equipped with the knowledge, to be an active participant, then you end up with the situation that you just described, where decisions are getting made for you, you're getting railroaded, and you find yourself 10, 20 years from now not being a part of the conversation as opposed to being an integral part of the conversation. So hopefully that kind of addresses that. In the interest of time, let me see.
Yeah, so I don't think we have enough time because we do. I know we need to end pretty soon, but we were gonna have you guys work through this decision tool using land registry, which we kind of talked about land options. It was sounding like so a little similar, but just kind of to frame that, like again, this doesn't just need to be with currency.
Right. So I think that's one piece. It doesn't need to just be with currency. The other aspect. So we initially conceptualized that we use land registry as something that we could talk about in this venue and kind of have it an open dialogue. At the end of the day, we recognize that you are all representing different organizations. We really wanted to go through an actual case where we could think about specific use cases within your organization and then think about, can blockchain be applied? Obviously, with time, we ask that you think of those use cases and run through the decision tool after this. Great. So the wrap up here, well, I'll just say how to stay involved. Great question from the back of the room. Is there a consortium that's kind of leading the conversation? Short answer is there really isn't. We assembled some of the organization that we talked to, some of the resources that we use. We want to hear from you if there's something that you found extremely useful, or let's say you're representing an organization. Please write it down on one of the feedback forms. We want to make this list as comprehensive as possible so that people are at least equipped with the information on who they can go to or where they can go to get more information on blockchain and potential use cases for blockchain. I'll finish off by saying we really appreciate the support from USAID's Food for Peace. It's been extremely instrumental in our understanding of aid. We also want to extend thanks to the Cash Learning Program. This event would not be possible without all the coordination of Jenny and Keith putting this all together. Interaction, I don't know if anybody's here, but the venue itself, really appreciate the use of this space. And then finally, USAID has this organization called the Higher Education Solution Network, which actually reaches out to universities, gets them involved in the process of thinking of how do you apply your great idea to aid. I think we recently had a guest at UC Berkeley. Her name is Takora Jones. She kind of heads up this organization. And she was basically saying, I can't tell you how many college campuses I go to, and there's students that come up to me with engineering backgrounds or whatever background says, hey, I've got the next new clean burning stove. And she's heard it 100 times, but at the end of the day, the real proof is in taking that concept and actually turning it into reality. That is the difficult part. The ideas are easy to come up with. The implementation is obviously the hard part, and we really respect all the work that's being done in this room to help get some of these great ideas off the ground and implemented. So we hope that you found this useful. We'd love to stay in touch. If you have a specific question, or your organization is thinking, hey, we've got this use case that we are trying to implement. What are your thoughts? We stumbled upon this one question that was on your decision tool. We'd love to hear about that. As we mentioned early on, this is kind of this presentation in and of itself is a learning opportunity for us. So if there was something that you wish we had dove deeper into or could have explained clearer, please let us know.
Is your presentation on these USBs?
So we can send out this presentation. We'll email it out to the list. I also think the Kelp team, somebody from the Kelp team said that this entire presentation is being recorded. So if you want to reference a certain part later on, make that available.
We also have extra decision tools if anyone can take some more.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.